Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Autism Insights. I'm your host, Bill Locke. At some point in our life, we all struggle with some pretty deep questions. What is the meaning of life in the midst of suffering? As individuals and families living with autism spectrum disorder, there seem to be many days when we find ourselves wrestling with questions like this. This story is about a man who lost his faith, but then rediscovered it as he delved into the ethics of his religion and its history of liberation. Liberation can open us up to empathy, compassion, love, and hope. What would our society look like if love was at the center? Meet Rabbi Nahum Ward-Lev. I had a fascinating conversation with Rabbi Nahum Ward-Lev, author of The Liberating Path of the Hebrew Prophets. Among other things, it helped me improve my Hebrew. Rabbi Nahum, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long, long time.
I'm delighted to be here, Bill.
Unlike a lot of Christians, I grew up as a Jew. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew by background, and know how to give a guttural sound, a sound. That's where that comes from. Like I learned how to say ruach.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. So I wonder, the material that we put on top of the sukkah is called schach. How can you do that one?
I won't even try to do that. I'll leave that to the experts. But I want to get into who this guy is, this rabbi in the desert, and how you ended up there. I'd like you to give me a little bit of background, your family, your personal background, professional background, and how the heck did you become a rabbi?
Okay. I guess I would start by saying that I'm a third generation Jew here in America, that my grandparents, all of them came from the Pale of Settlement from Eastern Europe and from Russia. And both my parents were second generation. They're born and raised in the United States. And I think I grew up in a pretty typical, I grew up in Los Angeles, West Coast, second generation Jewish family, in that my parents mainly just wanted to be Americans. They wanted to fit in, they wanted to be accepted. They wanted to make it in this new country and be comfortable and safe and all that. So I didn't grow up, I clearly Jewishly identified, but it wasn't a family of strong practice or strong faith. So the Jewish upbringing I got was sort of strongly identified, but there wasn't a whole lot of substance to it, which was a curiosity to me that was something that was really clearly important to my family. And I could feel in my grandparents, there was something of substance there, but I couldn't find it in our living. And so that was really an important part of my background, in the sense of it didn't quite make sense to me. And so I, after I became bar mitzvah, I pretty much left. I saw myself as really, I was interested in basketball, really. That was really my passion, much more than Judaism. And I came back to it in my 20s, in my early 20s. I was exposed to an Israeli Jewish educator whose name was Dr. Shlomo Bardin. And he communicated in a very passionate way that Judaism was an ethical civilization. Somehow, the way that the world was presented to me as this sort of mechanistic place of atoms that circle around and that we're on this planet in cold space didn't fit my inner experience. And I really felt this I didn't have a faith in God, but I wanted to find out, what is this faith in God? And I went to rabbinical school to find out more about God and about what does this tradition have to offer me about a relationship to God. And I'm still studying. I finished my rabbinical training, not to be a rabbi, because that's when it finished, and I'm still learning. I'm still growing, and I'm still studying.
So it sounds like the rabbi, the teacher, is also a student and hasn't stopped learning.
Very, very much so. And from my book, that a central theme in my book is that the Bible understands life to be a liberation journey, and a significant part of that liberation is learning. Finding out, I'm not yet living as fully as I can. My heart is not as open as it can be. I don't see as clearly as I can see, and it's a continued invitation to grow.
You talk about courage in the book, that God gives us courage. He doesn't simply want us to sit back and let the world basically destroy itself, that we are to be moved by God to take action.
Yeah, something that's very interesting to me is that the God that we meet in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, there are many images for God, but the most significant one is God the liberator. And so when the people meet God at Mount Sinai and God reveals the 10 Commandments, God begins the commandments with a sense of God's own bio. That's the way covenants were written in the ancient world, that the Lord began with, well, here's who I am, and this is why you want to covenant with me. And God's bio is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. God had a pretty good resume. God could have said, I am the Lord your God who created all that is, who created billions of galaxies, who created life itself. But what God wanted the people to know is, I am the God who took you out of Egypt. I am a God who's calling you into a journey of liberation. And so I think it's really significant to say that this liberation journey is something that God's calling all of us out on, and in our own day, as you and I have articulated, if we live in a society, in a world, certainly in the developed world, where imperial culture that's crumbling, and where there's new possibilities all over for different ways of coming together in society, that we're called to be part of this liberation journey. We're called to be involved in, how do we articulate what's falling apart, and how do we envision and enact a whole nother way of being in the world? How do we enact God's love in public is the call to us of the prophetic tradition in our own day. And we're called out in the wilderness of how to make a new world. I think it's so easy these days to become distressed and cynical about the world that we live in, that we lose our connection to the prophetic stream flowing through all of us, calling us to imagine, to work to call out oppression and to imagine an alternative future. And I think that we can all imagine what a society that placed love at its center. That's really what the prophets were calling us to do. What does a society that places love at its future look like? How would our educational system look? How would our immigration system look? How would our healthcare system look? How would our policing and our criminal justice system look? How would our economy look? What would our corporations look like? And we could all envision a radically different future, where we place love at the center. The other aspect I think that's important is, that the prophets really had a sense of, we're on a long journey, and so none of us can imagine how do we actually get there. But the question is, how do we take the next step towards creating a society with love at the center? To me, it's very powerful that the Torah ends with Moses dying in the wilderness. The great prophet never made it to the promised land. I mean, the editors who canonized it had the sixth book, the book of Joshua, made a much better story if the Torah ended with the sixth book with Joshua and the people arriving in land, in the promised land. You know what? It's a much better story ending with people, but the Torah has us end with Moses dying in the wilderness. God allows him to go to the top of Mount Nebo, and from that he sees the promised land. Martin Luther King actually stepped into that when he said, I may not get there with you, but I've seen it. I may not get there with you, but I've seen it. And I think that for all of us to have the courage to say, we will not get to the society that has love as robustly present at its center as we would like. But may we have the courage and the imagination to allow the prophetic stream flowing in us to take action, to do what each of us can do. Take us towards that promised land of a society with love at its center.
Beautiful, beautiful picture. Thank you, Nahum, for opening up about this call to something greater, something more beautiful.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's been a delight to be in conversation with you.
Thank you.